All programming languages include elements that allow you to determine the flow of the program, or in other words, the order in which the statements are executed. Control statements in SQL Server are statements that allow SQL to be used in a manner similar to writing a program in a structured programming language. Although these control elements in SQL are not as fully featured as languages like C#, the SQL control statements provide the capability to control the logic flow, declare and set variables, and handle warnings and exceptions. In this lesson, you will learn how to use the control of flow elements in T-SQL, how to write T-SQL code using if-else blocks, and how to write code using while statements. As we discussed earlier, the control of flow elements in T-SQL language control the flow of execution of transact SQL statements. These elements can be used in batches, stored procedures, and user-defined functions. Without the control of flow language, separate transact SQL statements are performed sequentially as they occur. Control of flow language permits statements to be connected and related to each other. These elements are useful when you need to direct transact SQL to take some kind of action. They allow you to determine whether or not to execute a statement and programmatically determine the order of execution of the statements. These elements include if-else, which executes the code based on a Boolean expression, while, which creates a loop that executes as long as a condition is true, begin-end, which defines a series of T-SQL statements that should be executed together, and other keywords like break, continue, return, etc. Let's take a look at an example. In this query that you see here, we are looking to see if there is an object called T1 under the DBO schema. When you execute this query, SQL Server will first check for that object and determines if the predicate in the if statement is true or false. If the predicate evaluates to true, then the drop statement is executed, and if it is a false, then nothing is executed. Let's take a closer look at the if-else structure. The if-else structure in T-SQL is used to conditionally execute a block of code based on a predicate. The if statement determines whether the following statement or block is executed. If the predicate evaluates to true, the code in the block is executed. If the predicate evaluates to false or unknown, the block is not executed. And if there is a block of code under the else keyword, that block of code is executed when the predicate evaluates to false or unknown. The if-else structure is very useful when combined with the exists operator. Let's take a look at an example. In the query that you see here, let's say that there is no else keyword and the block of statement that follows the else keyword. When you execute this query, if the object dbo.t1 does not exist, which means that the predicate for the if keyword is evaluated to true, then it will print object does not exist statement. With the use of else, you have another execution option if the if predicate evaluates to false or unknown. Let's say the object does exist. Then the predicate in the if clause is evaluated to false and the query executes the statement under the else, which in this case is a drop table statement. Let's execute some examples to see how the if-else statement works. Let's open a new query. And let's say if object ID of HR.employees is now, and let's have begin and end. Let's say print HR.employees does not exist, else begin end print HR.employees exists. And click on Execute. And it prints HR employees exists. Now let's just select the if statement and click on execute. It doesn't return anything because the if predicate evaluated to false, so this print statement is never executed and there is no other statement to execute. Like we discussed earlier, using the if with the exist keyword can be a very useful tool for efficient existence checks. Let's see how to do that. Let's say you want to see if there are any orders in the sales orders table for employee ID 5. You can do that by using if exists. Let's open a new query and let's say if exists select star from sales.orders where employee ID equals 5. Then let's say begin and let's print saying employee has orders. Let's first select this subquery and click on execute. And it came back with 42 rows, which shows that the employee ID 5 has some orders in the sales orders table. Now let's execute the whole query and it will return employee has orders because, as we have seen, employee ID 5 has some orders in the sales orders table. Now that you've learned how to use if-else statement and how to use if with the exist keyword, let's see how to use the while statement. The while statement is used to execute code in a loop based on a predicate. Like the if statement, the while statement also determines whether the following statement or block is executed. Statements in the while block repeat while the predicate evaluates to true. The loop ends when the predicate evaluates to false or unknown. Typically, you declare a variable and assign an initial value to this variable and manipulate the value of this variable inside the body of the while loop. This variable is tested by the predicate and controls the loop. The loop keeps executing until the predicate evaluates to false or unknown. The other way to control the execution of statements in the while loop is by using break and continue keywords. Let's take a look at an example. In this example, it uses employee ID variable in the predicate and changes its value in the begin end block using the set operator. Since the initial value of employee ID is 1 through this declaration, this while loop executes as long as the value is less than or equal to 5. Each time this loop executes, the employee ID is incremented by 1. Let's execute this query and see what the results will look like. Let's open a new query, paste the query that we just saw, and click on execute. The while loop executed for 5 times and it displays 5 results. If the select statement returns unknown, the variable employee ID retains its current value, and if there is no employee with an ID equal to the employee ID variable, the variable does not change from iteration to iteration, and that would lead to an infinite loop. Let's say you accidentally forgot to increment the variable value in the body of the while loop. Let's execute this query. And as you can see, the while loop is now getting executed infinitely. Let's click on stop to stop the execution, uncomment the set statement, and click on execute. It is very important to remember to increment the variable value within the while loop. So, now that we have seen how to use the while loop, let's recap what you have learned so far in this module. We have learned about the different programming elements in T-SQL, including batches, variables, and synonyms, how to write code that declares and assigns variables, how to create and invoke synonyms, and how to create and submit batches of T-SQL code for execution by SQL Server, how to control the flow of elements in T-SQL, how to write T-SQL code using if-else block, and how to write T-SQL code that uses the while loop. In the next module, you will learn how to implement error handling.